So, if you haven't watched My Policeman, the 2022 movie starring Harry Styles about a retrospect of a ill-fated romance in 1950s Britain, you really, really should. And especially if you are a Larry, and I'm basically saying the obvious, most Larrys probably have watched it, unless you're a recent Larry that discovered the story by chance. And there's been a lot of us recently as the interest in One Direction surged and they hit a billion streams on Spotify after Liam passed. So it's brought us to this. So the significance of My Policeman, I have a theory, and just a theory, that My Policeman is somewhat of a love story from Harry to Louis, because I believe that it was Harry who fell the hardest, being so young, for Louis, and it was Harry who really got his heart broken, and with the forced closeting that is suspected to have happened, which I personally really am leaning towards, and Louis becoming a parent, which I'm not even going to go down that consideration since we don't discuss family members, but as a aside, I think that it inevitably ruined Harry's yearning to have a family with Louis. But My Policeman is one long visual movie love letter from Harry to Louis. He has brought such depth to the acting that it's hard to believe this is the same guy that was in the movie with Olivia Wilde. There's a lot of things about the movie that parallel. Number one, it's in 1950s Britain when you see Tom and Patrick, the zeitgeist of that time was the outlying, or homosexuality was still outlawed. So Tom, who was played by Harry Styles, is newly or recently married. He is working as a policeman or a bobby in London, and he comes across this man, Patrick, who, under the guise of having something stolen in his gallery, uses that to begin a conversation with Tom. And if you think of how back then not only was homosexuality legal, you would go to jail for it, but Tom was a police officer, and so it kind of parallels this industrial complex of the music industry and the rules of kind of like what we had in the States, like don't ask, don't tell, when people that were LGBTQ plus couldn't serve in the military, or they would be discharged if it was discovered, until Clinton's administration worked to overturn that. And it, as much as it was an outward criminalizing of same-sex relationships, if you look at the music industry, very much a not criminalizing, but they might as well be doing it because they are so convinced that they need to keep revenue going, make deep violations into somebody's human rights. And like many fans have pointed out, the character of Tom wanted to keep things hidden for some practical reasons. He didn't want to lose his job, didn't want to go to jail. While Patrick was more the one who was trying to bring him out and was walking that wild side and kind of risking arrest a couple times in the film. And it kind of parallels how Harry in one of his songs says, it scares me that I'm so open, because if you look at the timeline, which the fans have done, there is this a lot of real physical closeness and locking of the knees and hand holding and just real physical touch with Harry and Louis up until they came to America, and then suddenly they were sitting together, and they were told not to sit together. They weren't traveling together until the airport, and then just the interactions on stage would have this sort of icy demeanor. very similar to how, Tom's conflicted because he wants to have this appearance, because so much is riding on keeping up appearance of this straight married man with a young wife versus what he really wanted to be. And it's the paralleling of, Patrick trying to bring him out while he is restricting, and it's polar opposite what happened with Louis, because Louis was the one that suddenly had this girlfriend for 10 years and suddenly was more and more uh, contained from his sassy self. Because you look at some of the really early Twitch cams where they're together, and Louis is sassy, and he becomes icy, and it's all this energy you can see of him holding in his body to kind of clamp himself down. It's almost more painful to watch because you know how much constraint that had to be, and then the constraint becomes so like second nature that it's almost like watching someone lose a self, which in the movie was more Tom, because without being a spoiler, Tom and Patrick really don't end up together until the very end, but there is a hole in between of Tom keeping up this facade with Marion, the wife in the movie, and they never have kids. Marion is actually quite aware of Tom and Patrick, but again, this is the 1950s. The whole sexual revolution hadn't happened, and yes, the laws would put people in jail, which is an unbelievable thought that was actually a thing. We've come a long way, but sometimes not enough, because even as the laws have updated to some extent here as well, with same-sex marriage passing, there are still industries that operate like the old guard and ruin people's lives, force them to live in a kind of prison that's not a prison, but it might as well be. So the reason why My Policeman was, and we'll never know for sure unless he tells us, was one big love letter from Harry to Louis, is because Louis was like Tom in real life. And I look at it as Harry trying to tell Louis that he understands how hard it has been, or what, and was, especially given how young they really were. I mean, they were barely adults, like legally adults. They were teenagers for the first 3 years of the band. And so it's a big, long love letter of telling the other that I'm in this with you, because he was able to bring forth that inner kind of fight within himself and the character because of his own personal experiences and this great love that is enduring, because that's the ultimate message of My Policeman. It's this great love that is so enduring. So yeah, I'm curious who else thinks that the My Policeman was one big love letter from Harry to Louis. Now, we still don't know if Louis was actually a body double, because apparently he was showing up in IMDb at one point, but then disappeared.